Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cocktail Hour Fantasy Football Podcast presented by the Face Off Sports Network. I am your host, Emerson Beery, and I am super excited to be joined by Chuck today. How you doing, my friend?
I'm as caffeinated as it gets for a Friday. I'm going to be ingesting a lot today, so I'm excited to kick off this weekend with just the most hot button issue you could ever come up with, which is tight ends and rankings. I mean, this is the jam right here.
You know what? I've already done the rankings for the other positions, and I know sometimes the tight end is not the sexy position. It's not the position, the most clicked on position if we were doing the running backs and wide receivers, but I know the hardcore people are going to be listening to this podcast. And when I look at the comments, I knew it. I was just about to even call it out before I got here. I knew Jamie would be here because Jamie's my man and he always joins us live. He's fantastic. I knew the hardcore people would be here for these tight end rankings today. And we're going to go in pretty deep. We're going to dive into the top tight ends today on this show. And, I always joke about it, but I am feeling fresh today as usual. I was just telling Chuck before the show that I was working bartending as usual. And now I had to pick up some people from Red Rocks last night. So I got to bed about 1:30. So I got my caffeine in me too. So we're going to jump right into it, my man.
Who was the show? Who was playing?
King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. Are you familiar with that at all?
I'm familiar. So everyone was having a good time and has probably slept soundly, I imagine.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So yeah, they had a very good time. I wasn't too familiar with them before this, but they have a lot of interesting stuff going on. I was listening to it on the way up there and on the way back.
Very Red Roxy.
Very Red Roxy. There's some crazy Swedish, like almost sounding death metal to him, and then they have some reggae sounding stuff. So they're all over the spectrum.
Yes, they're very Australian, and that means a lot of different things, but I love that about them.
I mean, everybody I hadn't heard of, but everybody loves it. But Jamie jokes here. We're ranking David Njoku 1-1, right? No, Jamie. I like it. He's going to be fairly high in these rankings, but not 1-1. So we'll jump into it though here. I'm very interested to see how you feel about the first player on this list. I thought about it. I wasn't going to let big fantasy and all the negative talk get me away from putting Kyle Pitts number one in these tight end rankings. He's still my guy. We saw over 1,000 yards as a rookie. I mean, he was number 5, I believe. I don't have the stat right in front of me. I actually should have wrote it down. I believe he was number 5 in air yards last year. Oh no. And then, let me get my little ranking sheet going back here. But
you already crashed it. Kyle Pitts at number 1 has already crashed.
Kyle Pitts at number 1. They couldn't handle it on the sleeper platform here, so I'll get that back going. But Kyle Pitts, number 1. I mean, he was number 5 in air yards last year, despite the fact that he missed like 6 or 7 games. I mean, that is absolutely crazy. It was just Marcus Mariota absolutely missing him every time he threw downfield. So what are your thoughts on Kyle Pitts? Am I right to have him this high in my rankings?
You absolutely are. And this is where, talking long-term is what's important here is that tight ends, they really do come and go, whether it's the offensive design, whether it's the quarterback tendencies or, injuries, whatever reason they come and go. But Kyle Pitts has this baseline capability that almost anybody else on this list isn't going to have. And that's going to allow him to sustain a long career, and especially where he's being used and how he's going to be used. I'm excited. I mean, if they're going to roll Marcus Mariota back out, or they maybe had somebody a little less exciting than Desmond Ridder, it might be possible to put some other guys up here. But he's just got too many indicators that he's going to be involved in some significant way for a long period of time.
How do you feel about Bijan Robinson? Because that's my big concern. It's just like, my goodness, Arthur Smith is never going to pass this ball again now. I mean, my God, he ran the ball. He ran the ball down people's throats with Tyler Algier. I can only imagine what he's going to do with Brian Robinson. You have Drake London there. I'm afraid they might be waiting on that next quarterback for these guys to be productive.
Sure. And it's hard to argue against that being a factor because he's just absolutely like a world beater. But I just try to look at, if we think Arthur Smith is a smart coach, which I do, and I can understand why he can be frustrating for fantasy, I try to look at what other smart coaches have done. And I mean, it doesn't get much smarter than Andy Reid, who's able to utilize Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, Kareem Hunt, all to extreme levels of success. And obviously that's the high water mark. But similar offenses have done it, San Francisco, Dallas, Philadelphia. there's a template for it. It just depends on, where he falls on the spectrum. And we haven't gotten to see what all the pieces look like together. So it's really hard to write the book on it yet.
Kyle Pitts, a very polarizing number one. And I still think, it might we might be waiting even one more season, but I still think he has a long, productive career ahead of him. Next up in these rankings, I had a little bit of a debate here, but I'm going to rank Mark Andrews number 2 in these rankings. I would like to hear your thought. We saw 10 plus targets a game in like the first 5 or 6 weeks last season. He was, that top 3 tight end that we wanted. He had multiple tight end 1 weeks. And then after that, the kind of passing volume dropped. His targets dropped in general. And then you saw, of course, he didn't have that same chemistry with Tyler Huntley that he had the previous season. So it was a slow ending to the season last year, and he didn't generate as much targets. So, he's very connected to Lamar Jackson here. Are the Ravens going to throw a lot more? Is he going to be the bona fide number 1 option now with Rashad Bateman, Zay Flowers, and Odell Beckham Jr. around? Not exactly, you don't see Lamar Jackson, even though he says he wants to throw for 6,000 yards. I know they have a new offensive coordinator. It's still hard for me to believe this is not going to still be a fairly run-heavy offense.
No, I completely agree with you. I think that while they want to make strides in some of their weaker areas, when you're trying to change things about your game, you still have a tendency to rely on your bread and butter to a certain extent. And I don't know if it gets more bread and butter in the league than Andrews and Lamar. And like you said, he was off to a pretty hot start last year. Before he had that week 6 knee injury, he had a 32% target shares, averaging almost 20 points a game. It hurt, we all thought like, oh, obviously he's quarterback proof, right? We saw what happened with Tyler Huntley, and that did not end up being the case. But he's still young enough, and he still commands enough targets that I think that he is a pretty damn good next man up. The only problem is, the uncertainty with the entire Baltimore situation in general. I'm wearing a Buccaneers shirt here. I've seen Todd Monken. I've seen him live and in person, and it's mixed results. So you're definitely right to question whether or not that's going to be the long-term play.
Yeah, and this thing's yelling at me. I forgot I started the timer. And it starts doing these weird timer things too. There we go. Okay.
Keeping us on our toes. I like it.
Yeah, Mark Andrews, it just doesn't make, I have him at number 2. I guess my problem with him is that I just wouldn't take him usually where he goes in a dynasty startup draft. He usually goes pushed in that third, if we're doing super flex, probably pushed into that 3rd round or something like that. And I would have him more as a 4th or 5th round pick. I just don't bet on most tight ends except for this next guy, Travis Kelce. I have no problem if you wanted to, in Dynasty, we play in 3-year windows anyway. If you want to take Travis Kelce, put him at number 1 because you think he's going to be really productive for the next 3 seasons. I don't have a problem with that at all. I'm a Chiefs fan. I still think Travis Kelce has a lot of juice in him, but like we're looking at unless we're looking at extreme outlier here, we have to be looking at the last 2 to 3 years at the absolute most of high-end production, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like you said, there's not what more can be said about Travis Kelce that hasn't been said over the last few years. I'm a big historical markers guy, and he's checked a lot of boxes that actually lead me to believe that while he may have trouble sustaining this ridiculous like cheat code pace that he's on, Tony Gonzalez, another former Chief legend, he was still dropping 908 touchdowns well into his mid to late 30s, 35, 36, 37. Granted, that was on Atlanta. But the tight end position, because it doesn't typically rely on speed, they age pretty well, especially if they've got high football IQ, which he's got the quarterback in his prime. He's got the offensive genius at design. Top 3 at the very minimum for sure.
Yeah. And, that's what I could definitely see that too. I think the kind of, like you said, the cheat code seasons probably have to stop here, probably in the next couple seasons, but if he wants to keep playing with Patrick Mahomes, I still think, 800 plus yards, absolutely within his range of outcomes. Patrick Mahomes can make it happen. Like I said, we'll just keep going here because not much needs to be said.
That one's easy. Kelce, that's a layup right there.
Layup, easily the tight end 1 in 2023, and it just kind of depends on your long-term outlook where he's going to fall in people's dynasty rankings. Next up, I'm keeping it pretty chalky here with the first 6 ones. It seems like it's fair. Depending on how you feel about Kyle Pitts, it's fairly chalky. I have TJ Hockenson as the next man up here. got traded to Minnesota last year for a second-round pick. And I mean, he was heavily targeted. He's going to be a big part of the offense. I think, just in general, it's tough to trust the tight end position, but I think, people are kind of feeling that way now in general. So his ADP is not super crazy high in drafts. When he goes in like the 4th round or something like that, that's still a little high for me in like a dynasty draft or even a redraft league. I still like to fade those tight ends more into the 5th or 6th round, somebody like him. But there's absolutely room for him to have a extremely productive season. He hasn't been a touchdown really generator much in his career, has not gotten inconsistent volume. But, what's your feelings? Is he going to really take off in this Minnesota offense?
Oh, this is probably the hardest one for me to actually figure out because it's in that sweet spot between Kirk Cousins hasn't really been a favorable tight end machine over his tenure, but they brought Hawk in. And I mean, Hawk was absolutely beautiful last year. What did he have? 7 top 10 finishes in his time, and he was traded in November. So he obviously filled in a massive need for them. Adam Thielen's gone. I don't really like KJ Osborne, and they drafted Addison, who I love. So was he a gap between the upcoming generation of wide receivers and running backs, or is he going to be a fixture of the offense? I don't know, and I think his price doesn't reflect exactly. It doesn't reflect security. So you're definitely taking a pretty big risk, but I think the payoff could be nice if it is a home run.
Yeah, like I said, he's more of a redraft target for me. I have no problem. You want to take a big stand on TJ Hockenson in 2023, bet on him having a big year. In Dynasty, like I said, it's just these tight ends outside of Travis Kelce, and I just have special feelings for Kyle Pitts. But other than that, it's just been, we've seen Darren Waller, we've seen George Kittle, and they've had their moments, but they've also, even Mark Andrews last season, these guys who have been pushed into the 2nd round of ADP, and stuff like that. And people are like, this is the next Travis Kelce. We're going to start seeing these just seasons pile up. Something always happens. It's health. It's inconsistent target volume. It's something pops up. So that's why I'm always a little that's why the tight end position is so polarizing in fantasy football.
Yeah. This is where we start to get into TJ Hockenson is where we start to get into there's more TJ Hawkinsons coming as opposed to Kelce is this one of one, Pitts is this one of one, and Andrews is somewhere in between. So this is where you can start to identify filling the void.
Yeah, and I feel like, we're getting into that. I feel like there's a strong top 6 tier. And these are the last 2 here. And then it's kind of a cliff dive. Next up is George Kittle. And I mean, George Kittle has been, he's a great football player. That's not to be decided. It's just, is this guy playing more tackle at times than he is tight end? Injuries are piling up. It's just, sometimes he's so good, but it's just he's never had, an elite quarterback to throw in the ball. There's so many weapons in this offense. It's Christian McCaffrey. There's Brandon Ayuk. There's Deebo Samuel. So, it's just tough for me to see Brock Purdy maintaining all this fantasy value. And I was looking, last point I'll make here is, I was just looking at their schedule. NFC West is down. I could just see a lot of games where kind of the 49ers, they get off to a 2 or 3 touchdown lead right off the gate. And then they're kind of taking it easy after that. So, what's your thoughts on George Kittle moving, in 2023 and moving forward past that?
Oh man, this is just the hardest one ever because I don't think there's a bigger gap between name, brand value, and his actual current state and role in the offense. He was tearing it up at the end of last year, which drove me nuts because I traded him away right before that run. And that's going to ride a lot of his value with Brock Purdy if that's who they continue to go with. But there's just so much inconsistency with San Francisco. I don't love the down weeks. I think he had somewhere between – all we have is the most recent data to use because that's all we can use as an indicator going forward for who the quarterback is going to be. But he had just as many weeks outside of the top 25, I think, than he did inside, which is really painful to see. And he did a lot of his work without Ayuk or without Kittle or without McCaffrey, like all together. When they all played together, he was 4th in line in target share. So just not a lot of positives for the Kittle that we've come to know and love. But as a player, he's unbelievable. His usage just isn't what we want from fantasy.
Exactly. And, it's kind of changed, sometimes a couple of years ago, it was more due to injury. He gets it done. He does not a traditional big touchdown guy. He falls kind of in that 4 to 6 touchdown territory. So he's not, he kind of gets it done more through the air, which is going to be tougher for him considering, the players that he plays with, it's Brock Purdy. You know, it's not a high level passer. I'm not as high on Brock Purdy as a lot of listeners know, as some people are. I can't believe, we're going. This is a whole subject for no whole other show, but I cannot believe that Kyle Shanahan with that kind of team is banking on the last pick in the NFL draft. But that's a conversation for another day.
It's rough. It's rough.
It doesn't make any sense to me, but George Kittle, still a fantastic football player, going to be playing for a long time. So still in this top 5. Next up, though, is Dallas Goedert. I feel that, like I said, I feel like this is the consensus top 6. It's really, you're not going to see much shakeup in that. So Dallas Goedert, number 6. You know, you look, Dallas Goedert, we've seen it. He's been very productive. But when you look at those, if you were looking at tight end finishes over the last 5 years, it's just, he has never paid off. And it's just been one reason or another. I know Zach Ertz was traded probably was a little less than 2 years ago. So, he hasn't had a chance to really step into the role fully yet. However, had some injuries, and he's kind of been dealing with that a little bit in his career. So, and kind of in the same issue as George Kittle. Jalen Hurts, of course, is a good passer, but still it's very run heavy offense. Jalen Hurts is a dual threat quarterback. So, passing volume is a little bit always an issue in those offenses. It wasn't really last season, but AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, I just feel like a lot has to go right for Dallas Goedert to have, to pay off, and to be a top 5, 6 fantasy tight end this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree, because with him being entrenched at the bottom of this top 6, depending on what your league and who you have going around, I mean, do you want to be in the no man's land of a guy who's consistently finishing in that, you look at his finishes from last year, with the offense, you've got a lot of top 10 finishes, but a very minimal amount of top 5 finishes, which is very indicative of his value right now, right? And that's going to happen when you're third in line for targets behind, the monsters that are AJ Brown and Devonta Smith. So this becomes, do you want consistency from the position, or do you want to just wait for the next group of tight ends to come up and grab a guy who could potentially vault Dallas Goedert? I think he is who he is, and I wouldn't expect any more or less. And some people find comfort in that. Others, they might want to swing for the fences.
Yeah. And you know what, if I'm kind of in that boat, I'd rather swing for the fences. Dallas Goedert, if he was being priced down where, kind of past where this kind of top 5 is, I would be fine with it. And I'd love Dallas Goedert, but he's more priced up closer to this top 5 territory. So that kind of, I'd rather just wait and grab another guy 3 or 4 rounds later. I just don't see a scenario where even if he plays a full healthy season, he gets a game breaking top 3 tight end here, unless there's a major unless there's, I believe, an injury to Devontae Smith or AJ Brown.
Yep, absolutely, completely agree.
Next up here, this is kind of where things get interesting. I have Dalton. It's the unknown that I'm leaning into here. It's what I don't know, because I know what the rest of these guys are bringing me. So I have Dalton Kincaid as my tight end 7. That may seem aggressive for some people, but like I said, give me a swing. You know what I mean? Because we for the rest of these few tight ends on this list, you know what? It's just we've seen them for years now. They don't have that kind of game breaking Travis Kelce upside. But hey, none of these tight ends ahead of him really had that, except for Kyle Pitts, had that kind of profile. Travis Kelce was a 3rd round pick. George Kittle was a 3rd round pick, I believe. Mark Andrews, 3rd round pick. Or George Kittle was like a 4th round pick, maybe. So
yeah, George was later. Yeah.
And TJ Hockenson was also a 1st round pick. But you have a lot of these guys. You get snagged them later in draft. So and Dalton Kincaid is a 1st round pick. I know that, but so I guess what I'm trying to say is we don't know with these tight ends. So give me the unknown tied to the Buffalo Bills offense. Obviously, the floor is lower than some of these guys below him, but I think, the sky is the limit. And if the Buffalo Bills felt like they needed to take a 1st round pick on a non-premium position like tight end, I'm willing definitely to take a shot on it.
Absolutely. And I completely agree. And what I love about this is a team that, they basically did what you want to see for a tight end, which is they said what we're doing right now is not working or something stagnant. We need to make a big change. This is what the Seahawks did when they brought in Jimmy Graham. This is what the Cardinals did when they brought in Zach Ertz. And I mean, those guys were immediately involved in the game plan, obviously experienced vets, but we're talking about a similar path to being involved in the offense. It won't be long before I think he's number 2 in targets. I mean, Gabe Davis, what was he looking at last year? He was looking at something like 48 receptions. He did have 93 targets, but I mean, 48 receptions is very easy to eclipse. Bills have been top 10 in passing offense the last 3 years. I don't think they have any other credible options. They just have a credible quarterback. So I just I like what we're going to see out of him in the short term, and I love what we're going to see out of him in the long term. Just great profile.
And there's the tight end landscape is riddled with first and second round busts. I just going too high in a dynasty startup is about for instance, I don't know how plugged you in are. It's actually been like a year and a half since I've done a dynasty startup because I joined I'm in like 30 leagues and I joined most of them during COVID. So, and I don't like to quit leagues either. So I actually have not done a dynasty startup in a long time, but I don't know how plugged, how soon recently you've done one, but where would in a super flex draft, maybe where would you be looking at Dalton Kincaid?
I actually haven't done one either because I'm similar to you. I dove into a bunch around COVID time, and I'm feeling overwhelmed as things are. I definitely know that he's being faded for very similar reasons because of what you mentioned about these first round busts. But the difference is not every bust is made equal. Kyle Pitts is busting has not popped yet because of injury and incredibly low passing volume. TJ Hockenson, similar thing on the Lions offense. These guys take time to develop, and they have late career surges, a lot of them. So it's just something that you have to be patient for. But that's starting to reflect itself in the value of the tight ends.
And that's a good point you made. It's kind of they have those late career breakouts. And that's always why I actually, rookie tight end, a lot of the time, if they're going at a premium, Dalton Kincaid really isn't going at a premium value that some of these early tight ends in recent years have. But, you can always buy lower later. You know what I mean? Also, if it takes years to develop, they might not even be on your dynasty team anymore. You know what I mean? You might have traded them away or something like that and kind of just gave them away or something like that as a throw in. So, that's what you always have to factor in. You know what I mean? Like you don't want to be playing too far down the line. And so that's why I've always, Dalton Kincaid in the mid first round of a rookie draft. I'm like, I can't do that. But later first round, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm looking in a friend's dynasty startup that he just did recently, and we have Dalton going in the late 9th round, just around like Keenan Allen and AJ Dillon. Yeah, that's very perfect. Very well reflected.
Very reasonable. And I might even take him, a little before that even, but just somewhere not in those early rounds. Yeah, exactly. So next up here, and I guess I will throw in, that's another point. If you did draft Dalton Kincaid, yes, don't sell him low after a slow start. Next up in these rankings, let me take a look here. I have David Njoku. There he is, Jamie, for you. David Njoku.
Speaking of late career resurgence, this is it right here. This is a great transition.
Yeah, absolutely. Freak athlete, has a big contract with the Cleveland Browns. I'm ready to see a healthy season. I would love to see what he can do with Deshaun Watson, who also has had a full offseason, more focused on football. So, you look around the offense, there's some talent. Nick Chubb, of course, is going to be a big part, but you could see a scenario where easily David Njoku is the second leader in targets if he remains healthy. So, what's your outlook? And do you think we can see a nice little string, a couple of years of production here with Deshaun Watson?
I love this because I think he has the potential to have your TJ Hockenson, Dallas Goedert numbers, but he's tiered down and he's cheaper. And it's clear that the organization values him. It's very rare that a player hangs on for this long without putting up even remotely, lovely stats, whether it's through injury or through quarterback play. I'm of the ilk that the Browns have been in their current mold because of who they had at quarterback, whether it was Baker or Jacoby Brissett. I think the moves that they've made have indicated that they're ready to take, another leap. And I think he's the perfect guy to do that. I love that they have Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, Donovan Peoples-Jones, just a bevy of targets that teams can't no longer focus in on him. So I think that we should be looking at a nice 3 to 4 years from him.
And Jamie, I knew Jamie would approve of this. Yes, you have
him
exactly where I have ranked, and he's cheap in startups. Exactly, and once you're getting into that double-digit round, 9th round of a startup draft, absolutely, when David Njoku's there, take that pick. You have a lot of upside, especially these next couple of seasons, and he has that supreme kind of athletic ability that we see. That is essentially required to be kind of a top 3 tight end that we've seen recently, at least. So. Very excited about David Njoku this season. Next player I have up in my rankings, though, is give me another shot on the unknown. This is higher than consensus, and it's not because I'm in love with Michael Mayer as a prospect. Once again, it's the fact that let me take a home run swing here. Michael Mayer, I mean, he was an absolutely absurdly high. I mean, he was just used at an absurdly high rate in college. You see this kind of absurd kind of usage from tight ends only from super small schools like Division II schools. There's tight ends, that are a huge part of the offense. Not at Notre Dame. I mean, he had an over 30% target share last year. And if you know anything about tight ends in college, that is absolutely insane. Over 800 yards receiving, just the main focal point of that offense. You don't see that very often from tight ends. So, obviously the concern is, I work for Player Profiler, and, if, for fantasy research, there's nothing better than Player Profiler's website. And, they do an all-time composite rankings of the athletic scoring of tight ends. So, there's thousands. And I mean, not thousands, I'm sorry. There's like 700 or 600 something tight ends ranked in the database. And Michael Mayer has the 4th worst athletic score overall all time. Yeah. All time. And it's, I mean, there's like 600, 700 tight ends in the database. So, I think maybe that's why he fell so far. So, maybe, like I said, maybe he doesn't have that ceiling. Maybe that's what takes it off. But I think, we could have a long productive tight end, and I don't see any reason to have somebody like Pat Freiermuth or somebody ahead of Michael Mayer. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree. And if you're I'm looking in that same draft that I was just telling you about. He was going in the late 10th. Around like your Josh Downs and your Tank Bigsby's and, your crowd favorite Brock Purdy. So his value is, if you believe in his talent, you're going to have an opportunity to take him. This is another perfect marriage, Jimmy Garoppolo, big tight end guy, Josh McDaniels, who, I hope he makes it through the year because he's a big tight end guy. They just run the kind of offensive designs, that really you don't need to be that athletic as a tight end to run. You just have to have high football IQ and availability. So we're going to know pretty quickly with him, I think. His situation is a little murky, and he might not have that 10-year career that you're looking for because of his athletic profile. But it's hard to argue of all the rookie tight ends, I think he fell in the best position for known certainties around. So I like where he's in these rankings.
Yeah, and he's a very good blocker. I mean, there's no reason he shouldn't be out on the field very early. So I think he's very safe. I think I do think
very.
It's always hard to project what's going to happen 10 years from now, but I do think Michael Mayer does have a long career ahead of him. So I think he's very safe. I don't know if he has top 5 tight end upside, but somebody if you're in the double digit round of a startup draft, absolutely take him, and you probably have a top 10, 12-ish tight end for the foreseeable future. So I'm absolutely fine with that.
Yeah.
Next up, though, here we have Pat Freiermuth, and I'm a little bit lower in consensus. I just don't necessarily see it. Pat Freiermuth has been, he's entirely been a volume guy, not been a red zone threat, not a great athlete. And if you're just looking around in this Steelers offense, George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, Najee Harris back there. It's Kenny Pickett. How much is he going to throw? So, what's your thoughts on Pat Freiermuth? Am I a little too low on him here?
No, I think that he is great for, and we've danced around this a little bit. He's great for redraft. He's going to play, and he's going to be on the field regularly. But I just don't love his upside. The Steelers historically just haven't valued tight ends that much, and it has been the same, people running the organization for a long time. So it's not like we have a pretty consistent through line. I don't love Kenny Pickett. I love Deontay, and I really like George Pickens. So he's just, if he's not going to be one of the top 2 targets on the offense, and he's not bringing the kind of profile that you want from a player, is just not going to be my kind of guy in Dynasty. I'd rather tear down and take somebody with more upside or trade for one of the bigger dogs. So not my cup of tea for Dynasty. Redraft, I like him because, when you factor in all kinds of different things, he's going to be able to give you those top 6, top 7 weeks, but it's just not going to be those top 2, top 3, top 4 weeks.
Yeah, I just don't know. I could definitely see the top 10, 12-ish weeks. I just don't know how much he can do with so many people. Deontay Johnson was number 6 in targets last season. You expect George Pickens, to continue to develop. Maybe he gets more targets if he's not just a downfield threat like he was used last season. So I just don't see the up. If I'm going for tight end, I'd rather not get a guy who's just going to settle into that back end tight end one range. I'm going to take some home run swings like we keep talking about. So Pat Freiermuth, not somebody I'm really targeting in either kind of draft format.
Mm-hmm.
Next up, though, Darren Waller, very polarizing player here.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
this is a great transition.
Here? Yeah, what are we getting here? You know what I mean? This is extremely tough. He's with the New York Giants now, and I think we know what he can do when he stays healthy. It just hasn't been like that these last couple seasons. Your dog is very passionate about Darren Waller, and I want to hear his thoughts as well.
It's because he knows that he's a dog. This is so funny. My dog was downstairs, and he's come. Hey, bud. Where you going? You want to say hi to the stream? He's excited. This is the perfect player to talk about right after Freiermuth, because Freiermuth is going to give you that high floor, low ceiling. Darren Waller is going to give you that massive ceiling, basement level floor. When Darren Waller plays, he is one of the best tight ends, bar none. They were aggressive in acquiring him. I love him coming in. I talked about Jimmy Graham and Zach Ertz being traded or signing with new teams earlier. I think this is that exact mold. I think that he checks boxes on that team that nobody else even comes close to checking. And I trust the offense. I trust the coaching staff. Daniel Jones is, he doesn't have to be a top quarterback to deliver top tight end targets. So I love him for the win now 3-year dynasty window.
Yeah. And it's, I think it's maybe more of a 2-year kind of deal for me, because it's just a little tough. He struggled with injuries so much, and he's, he had just that couple, he was a late bloomer, obviously, he overcame some issues and everything like that, but he came onto the scene out of nowhere. He was like a waiver wire pickup like that in that 2019 season or something like that, put together some really strong production. He's a terrific athlete, but just considering where he's, what stage he's at in his career, past the 30. So
he's the 30 of the board so far. Yeah, no, of all the guys on the board that we've mentioned, he is in his own tier of risk. And there's not really anybody else and that's the tight end position in general. But him more so than anybody else.
Yeah, it'll be super interesting because, it's hard to not see him massively paying off at this price in 2023, particularly if he plays 15 plus games. It's just how many games are we going to get out of Darren Waller from a position that, is notorious from being, just a injury risk position in general. Next up, and some people have, this is another guy, you could see him as high as tight end 7, I'm pretty sure, but from some people, and you could see it back at kind of where he is here. This is Evan Engram. And the only reason I have him this low, after a top 5 finish, is because I just don't necessarily trust the volume that he's going to get now that Calvin Ridley's with the team. There's still Zay Jones. There is Christian Kirk. There's Travis Etienne back there. And then I was just chatting with somebody, I interviewed so many people. It's kind of always getting tough, but I was just having a conversation with somebody.
Nice flex.
They were telling,
sorry, I just interviewed so many people.
I'm doing this so many times. I have all these great people I've on. It's kind of tough to remember them.
Yep. Yeah.
But he was chatting with me, and he was telling me that he thinks Tank Bigsby's a better pass catcher than Travis Etienne. And he was explaining to me, and I agree with, I knew that Travis Etienne was a little bit overblown as a receiving prospect coming out. It was a lot of, wasn't necessarily a great pass catcher or a depth route runner, more of a screen catcher. And, he was telling me that he thinks Tank Bigsby has a lot better hands. So, do we see Travis Etienne finally get that passing game role? That's I like to dive down little rabbit holes here, and that's a whole nother conversation. But what I'm rounding back into here is that Evan Engram, it's going to be tough for him to get consistent targets. I think he's he's in one of those classic kind of move tight ends as well, one of those smaller tight ends, and they just seem to struggle to maintain to be a consistent part of the offense. So, what's your thoughts on Evan Engram moving forward?
I agree. You hate to see this from him, and he's not, if he's going to even remotely come down in the pecking order, he's never really been a red zone touchdown guy. So you're not going to get that short-term boost from him. The biggest benefit from him, though, is he could fly up these rankings. He's on the franchise tag. If they decide not to bring him back, and he's capable of he's proven that he can move in and out of offenses with fluidity. So if he's able to move on to another team after this and maybe entrench himself as a number 1 target or number 2 target, I like that a lot. Still relatively young. He's got that great athletic profile that's going to allow him to be, malleable for all kinds of different offenses. I like there's just, there's uncertainty with his future, but his upside is still very, very premium. It's just his upside with the current team that he's on is not.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I think there's room. I mean, the offense is so powerful. You could definitely see if Evan Engram kind of can just slide underneath, if other teams are focused on Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk, there's a path. I believe it's unlikely. Evan Engram, somebody who's also struggled with injuries, drops. There's just a lot of reasons you could see Evan Engram not paying off at his current ADP. Sure. Next up, I have a player who's a little underrated, I think. Cole Kmet was a darling last season. People were ready to, jump on the breakout season. It didn't happen. Justin Fields, he had a very rough season passing the ball. It just wasn't a pass-friendly offense in general, but he had some weeks. He started to develop some chemistry with Justin Fields down the stretch last season. Going into his fourth season, you have a guy, big body. I think this is perfect. I think, adding DJ Moore, Darnell Mooney getting healthy back, I think can take some attention off him. I think, if Justin Fields can take a step forward as a passer, I think, you could be looking at that next kind of top 10, we could be looking at that kind of sleeper guy who has a top 10 finish this year. What do you think?
I definitely think so, because I'll be honest with you, while I like DJ, I like DJ Moore. I think he's a good player. And the other guys have proven serviceable. I think Cole Kmet has one of the best pathways to targets and red zone usage of anybody that we've mentioned so far. I mean, just last year alone, which was a crazy year for the Bears, he had more top 5 finishes than TJ Hockenson. He tied guys like Evan Engram, Tyler Higbee, Pat Freiermuth, guys that were pretty firmly entrenched in established passing offenses. The Bears are still finding their footing, and they're coming up pretty strong, and they're being very aggressive about it. He's young enough. He's got the profile enough, and he's actually terrific match with Fields because he's great when the play breaks down, which is Justin Fields' bread and butter. So we're talking about another guy here that I think we don't exactly know where his value is going to land, which is usually an opportunity.
Exactly. And, I keep, it's been, I think because my brain's not working, I've used the term 100 times during this podcast, but another, home run swing, because I cannot think of a better term right now. So just like I said, guy with maybe a little lower floor than some of the next couple guys on this list, but I like the ceiling quite a bit. I could definitely, it would not, this is one of those guys who, one of those outlier candidates to finish, I think, as a top kind of 6, top 7 tight end. Next player up here, and I have him a little bit lower. He's my tight end 14, Greg Dulcich. It's just the risk of a new coaching staff. He got on the field right away last season. And I mean, it was impressive, I thought, that he was injured the first 6 weeks last year, 5-6 weeks. And then the coaching staff immediately was like, get him back in, and get him as the starter. So that was impressive. But new coaching staff, it's kind of a reset a little bit. I always think they did bring in Adam Trotman and another tight end. I forget who else they brought in. And then you still have Albert Okwuegbunam. I didn't get that. I don't think I got that fully right.
I was about to say, you about to roll this out with no problem.
I was one of the first times I think I actually tried it. I think I got pretty close. Sorry, Albert, but I think I gave it a good effort. But
it's okay. That's why everybody says Alberto.
I know exactly. That's what I usually say. But I mean, I still think he's still the part of that offense. And I think a coaching staff, when you see him out on the field, I mean, I feel like you want to try to give him a shot. So I just, we'll see the pecking order. We'll see what Denver does. But, this is another guy I could see just kind of getting lost in the shuffle with some talented wide receivers with an offense that's a little iffy as well.
Yeah, this is tough. You're right, because you love the idea of a tight end / wide receiver hybrid in a Sean Payton offense with a capable quarterback in Russell Wilson. I've written off last year completely. I've written all the negatives off because I think that sometimes it can just be a shit show. I'm obviously skeptical of, with the ceiling of the current players on the roster. But I think that this is somebody you need to be patient with, because I do think he has a lot of potential. I love his athletic profile. I love the coaching staff. And, outside of, Judy, who I really like, the rest of the guys are also in a prove it scenario. So I think that they're Sean Payton, like you're right, new coaching staff coming in. I think they'll use this year to evaluate everybody's strengths and weaknesses. So I wouldn't expect much in the short term, because I don't think they're in a win now, even though some people are projecting them to be competitive immediately. So just sit pretty on him, maybe acquire him if you can for cheap, and, just be patient.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. If you do draft him, still know exactly he's in his second season. Give him a little chance to,
Yeah.
develop some chemistry with Sean Payton.
Mhm.
What did Sean Payton use in recently? He's called it the Joker role.
Joker.
That he
Yeah,
said
yeah.
the Joker role that he was going to use him in, which has been operated by guys not necessarily in his skill set, like Alvin Kamara and players like that. But whatever, Sean Payton coaches say crazy things in the offseason, so I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
Maybe you see Greg Dulcich taking some running back carries next year. So we'll find
Sometimes
out
I
what
think
happens.
it's like that South Park scene where like they cut the head off the chicken and they have it running around and selecting. I
Oh
think
man.
that like guys like Sean Payton just do that for the terminology that they're going to give to players because they know how much impact it's going to make.
The worst one is when they tell people, "Oh, this running back is going to play in the slot this season." It's like, okay, buddy. Okay, I've seen that enough. I will never buy that again.
Yeah.
Don't ever tell me that
Oh
again. Don't
yeah.
ever tell me
Oh, you know
somebody's
that
going to
in
play.
April, do you? Okay, cool.
Oh my God.
Good
There's
talk.
so many good wide receivers. I think what happens is, same thing with tight ends. Okay. There's so many good wide receivers in the NFL. It's really, really, really hard for a running back or a tight end to get out there and play in the slot. You have to be really, really good to do it. So I am
Very.
always just like,
Yeah.
when I see people I'm going to play in the slot, I'm just like, okay.
Yeah, well, especially now with how good defenses have been at identifying slot corners that can handle some of these mismatches. So it's becoming increasingly more difficult to just be like, okay, go play slot. Nobody's paying attention to it. It's just not the same league.
Exactly. I completely agree. Zach checking into the chat. Hello, my friend. Great to have you. Zach's another regular. Zach, I have this graphic up so you can catch up a little bit. We've gone through, I believe, our top 16 tight ends, and now we will get into the 17th ranked. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Getting a little ahead of myself here. I was actually used to 12 picks being up on that top part. So it's a 10 pick draft. So actually, we were only at 14. So now we're jumping into 15. Sam
Nice.
LaPorta. Man, he got the draft capital we were looking for. Detroit Lions threw, kind of, positional advantage out the window, took him before Michael Mayer even. Terrific athlete. I really liked what I saw at Iowa. I had him as my tight end 3. I think I had him as my tight end 3 coming into the draft process. I was a big fan. I was really surprised to see him go ahead of Michael Mayer. Huge part of the Iowa offense. Great at contested catches, strong tackle breaker. There's a lot to like. I guess my concern is he's that smaller tight end. That move tight end is what they call it now. Has been inconsistent for fantasy over the years due to injury, lack of consistent usage without being probably a productive blocker. What's your outlook on Sam LaPorta going forward?
Man, the blocking part is going to be a huge part of this, and that's going to be the part of his game he's going to have to really take notches above because the Lions are going to ask a ton of him for that area. They've got their Amon-Ra St. Brown. Jameson Williams is coming back. But other than that, I mean, they're going to have to rely pretty heavily on this position because it's, like with Dalton Kincaid, they basically said, we have a void here. They traded away Hockenson because I don't think his game was well-rounded enough for what they want to do. But then they drafted a guy that I'm not sure exactly fixes that. So I'm a little hesitant on the amount of snaps he'll be able to play in the short term. But as far as bringing in a dimension to the offense that they're sorely lacking, he certainly fits that mold. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah, and I've heard that speculated, and he is somebody who I could see having being a big focal point of the game, like having like 5-6 targets a game, that plays that he goes out for and gets. But you know what I mean? Yes, the consistent usage I think could be an issue. Next up is one that people are very, this is the dynasty darling, probably of the suburb, Chigoziem Okonkwo.
Yes, very much.
I love what I saw. There's so much to like. He's an elite athlete, and you saw him break some of those big plays last season, but not a strong production. Didn't put on a full season of production last season, and he is very small. And I keep bringing that up for some of these issues. And there's of the players that we've talked about, the only people remotely close to his size, he is the smallest one so far, is Evan Engram and Sam LaPorta. And that's pretty much it, I think, as I'm looking at these rankings here. And they're significantly smaller than the rest of the players on this list, and it's just tough for these guys to get out there on an every down basis. He's listed between 6'2" and 6'3", 235 to 245 pounds, depending on which site you
Mhm.
look at. So he's a small guy. So, I know the Tennessee offense is wide open opportunity, but there's a
Mhm.
lot of risk here that I think some people aren't factoring in. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that I completely agree as far as let's maybe chill on the ceiling, but I completely understand the upside swings. Some people have penciled him in as their number one pass catcher on this offense, and I think it's Burks by a mile still,
Yeah, I
although
agree.
it definitely is. Yeah, it definitely is Chig at number two. My main concern for them is, the quarterback will be whatever. I'm not too worried about that. The way that they use their offense, you mentioned the height and the size and everything like that. They rely more on their guys winning one-on-one matchups as opposed to designing guys in space, which is where I think he would be ideal, right? Yards after catch, being able to pick up chunk plays, use his athleticism. That's not really how they run things around there. So I'm not quite sure that he's going to be utilized like we all think that he can. But that's where it gets into, this price point, it's worth taking a flyer on for the potential.
Yeah, like I said, I'm just, now that he's priced up so high is why I fade him a little
Mhm.
bit. We're gonna start. I like to keep these under an hour, so I have 7 tight ends left or 8 tight ends. So I'm gonna kind of, Dalton Schultz, the most vanilla tight end in
Yeah.
the world. I'm gonna skip past him.
Yes.
There's just no
Thank
upside.
you.
There's
Thank
just
you.
nothing there.
Look, there's
Yeah,
nothing wrong with Dalton Schultz, but he's a jag. He's
yeah,
just
just
a
another
guy.
guy. Exactly. I mean, and he got nothing on the free agent market. So I mean that
Mhm.
tells you what NFL teams think of him. Really, you see, guys like Josh Oliver pretty much making as much as he does. So Dalton Schultz,
Yeah.
not somebody, I think he's fine. I don't think he's a threat to finish it as a top 12 tight end this season. Just
Mhm.
another guy, like you said. Next up after that is I really like, this is interesting. This is a home run swing for sure.
Mhm.
Trey McBride, so just the first tight end selected
Mhm.
in the 2022 NFL draft. I mean, he didn't really get an opportunity until week 10 when Zach Ertz tore his ACL, and then all of a sudden was a huge part of the offense. Had some productive games last year with third string quarterbacks, even with the disaster
Mhm.
that was going on in Arizona. So I think there's a lot to like here. He is a good athlete. Was
Yeah.
very good at the NFL Combine just a year ago. So yeah, I think there's a lot to work with this season. How much is Kyler Murray going to play? What's the ultimate upside if it's a backup quarterback for the first half of the season? I can understand that argument, but Trey
Sure.
McBride, somebody I certainly see as having a lot more long-term upside than a lot of the players who are ranked around him on this list.
I completely agree. And if you've drafted Trey McBride or you're looking to draft him, you couldn't have written the script better for him to finally start to come up between them, the Cardinals actually committing to Kyler Murray, new coaching staff coming in, Zach Ertz rapidly approaching, the end. Been a great mentor as far as passing games can go, and they released DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, this is about as clear a path to becoming the second pass catching option on offense as anybody that we've mentioned so far might have. He, like you said, he profiled great. His measurables are fantastic. And I think that this is going to be, this will be a great barometer for how much the Cardinals value him for this upcoming year. And he's priced behind, going behind some of the guys he's going to, but he still arguably has a higher ceiling.
I agree. And this is kind of, it depends on what you're going for as far as where the next
Mhm.
player goes on this list. Tyler Higbee is the next player on this list, and he's more valued
Mm,
for what I think he can just pretty much do this season. As the tight end 19,
sure.
I really don't, I'm not even really going to project what he's going to do in 2024 and beyond. It could be nothing, but I think there's a scenario, he could be the second target of this offense and finishes a top 8 fantasy tight end last year. He is
Mhm.
heavily targeted a lot of those games when he's on the offense. It's just something happens, you know, whether the
Yeah.
offense becomes a disaster, whether he gets injured. But man, he has just these 10 plus target games. He just starts stacking up, and you're all of a sudden you're like Tyler Higbee, top 5 tight end this week. So, I think he could have a lot of upside in 2023, just not somebody that I'm projecting, as a long, productive fantasy career going forward. Do you agree?
Yeah. I agree. He's having a late career resurgence esque, only it's kind of not just starting, it's kind of in its peak and it's getting ready to, I think, maybe mellow out a little bit. I love him as a win now acquisition. Last year wasn't really an aberration. In 2021, he was actually averaging more points per game. He just ended up getting injured and had some trouble staying on the field. And it was just the Cooper Cup bonanza that it was. So he's shown that with Matthew Stafford and his ties to the organization, and with the lack of anybody who's really credible to get in his way, he should still be a not a focal point because you can't be a focal point when Cooper Kupp exists, but a major player.
Yeah, and I mean, at this point in the draft, that's all you can ask for. The next
Mhm.
up, any thoughts on Luke Musgrave? Kind of that, people were talking about the bite your kneecaps off kind of Dan Campbell style kind of, player, just, interviewed great at the NFL Combine,
Mhm.
strong athlete, could have been a huge part of the Utah offense, but,
Yeah.
kind of struggled with injuries a little bit. So, what's your thoughts on, I'm sorry, Oregon State? I meant Oregon State.
Yeah.
What's your,
Yeah. I'm not finding myself really having any Musgrave across the board in any meaningful way, just because I'm pretty sour on the entire situation there. I don't know what the Packers regime looks like post Aaron Rodgers. And I do believe if we see anything out of Musgrave, it'll be game film and not stats. So if he's somebody I want to target and maybe a trade talks the year after this, next summer, something like that. But I'm going to let this play out and see if he does anything at the NFL level and can stay on the field to give me a reason to buy in.
Yeah, I mean, if he's kind of forgotten about in a dynasty startup,
Mhm.
15 rounds in or something like that, take your shots. Not somebody I
Mhm.
have super high hopes for. Just kind
Yeah.
of a guy who isn't a particularly strong blocker. So he's gonna probably have to play in the slot a lot too. So it's always tough
Mhm.
to depend on those guys. So Luke Musgrave, not super high in my rankings.
Yeah.
And this is, like I said, we're just going to go back and forth here. Juwan Johnson, more of a guy I don't have a really much of a
Mhm.
long-term outlook on, but somebody set up if you're competing this season in a dynasty league, somebody who
Mhm.
could be set up for a nice little string of production. And he was just recently signed by the New Orleans Saints, so it's not like they don't have
Yeah.
confidence in him either. So,
Mhm.
what's your thoughts on Juwan Johnson as a player? Because I feel like a lot of dynasty managers don't know too much about him.
Yeah, I like him to kind of be honestly in that Pat Freiermuth sort of more redrafty than long term. This is another offense that I don't trust the coaching staff. I don't trust Derek Carr at all. And Michael Thomas is still this kind of boogeyman that's been hiding. He's been the big bad hiding under the bed for a couple of years now. I still think he has got a lot of gas left in the tank. So if you're telling me it's going to be a low volume passing offense, you're going to have superstar Chris Olave and a man who was a superstar, Michael Thomas, still there. I just think I don't even think he's a lotto ticket. I just think he's a scratch off. So not finding myself. I'd rather swing big, like we've talked about several times.
Okay. Next up, here's another guy. Maybe you like his 2023 season prospects.
Mm,
Another guy, not a super talented guy. You're projecting for a big role going forward,
mm,
but Gerald Everett, projected to be the starter in Los Angeles
mm.
this season. Could be a high-powered offense if they bounce back after Justin Herbert had some sophomore, junior struggle. Man, I'm losing it this morning. But yeah, third year, yeah. So
Yeah.
hopefully we see the offense bounce back for everybody here. So what's your
Mhm.
thoughts on maybe Gerald Everett's? I like I said, I doubt you think he's going to be
Yeah.
a long-term player here, but what's your thoughts on his 2023 season?
I think that people that are optimistic on Juwan Johnson should actually be optimistic on
Okay,
Gerald
yeah.
Everett, because I think that he's going to be the person that people want Juwan Johnson to be. Definitely don't project him long term. But as far as win now and, talking about really high ceiling as far as, the quarterback, the offensive design. And I mean, I try not to factor minor injuries into the game too much, but if there is a team that you want to, you basically can pick, pencil in starters missing time. The Chargers would go 1 of 1 in everybody's draft, between Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. And some of the other guys they have coming back from injuries as well. So I like him a lot in a 2 to 3 year window, or 1 to 2 year window.
Next up is a guy, I'm kind of feel the same way. Mike Gesicki's just a sneaky guy. He just kind of has
Mm-hmm.
some productive weeks every now and then. With
Mm-hmm.
the new offense, could Bill Belichick find an interesting role for him? He wasn't used like he usually was last season. This is a guy who had played had been top 3 in slot percentage for a tight end each of his almost every season he's been in the league, and then last season all of a sudden was like 16th or 17th in slot percentage. So, taken completely out of the role that he was accustomed to. So,
Mm-hmm.
could we see a bounce back in 2023 for him?
I definitely think so. When we talked earlier about Evan Engram potentially going to another team because he might get lost in the target shuffle, This is the pathway. This is Mike Gesicki on a contract year, playing for some good money. And he's, he brings an element to the offense that Hunter Henry just does not. And, he's historically worked significantly out of the slot, taking wide receiver snaps and whatnot. I mean, no team values that more than the New England Patriots do. I love the match with Bill O'Brien running the show now at OC. So I'm very optimistic. I just hate that it's a short contract. I would love for him to be the guy in New England for a couple, 2 or 3 more years.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, the Bill Belichick loves signing tight ends. So, if Mike Gesicki has a productive season,
yeah, we've been down this road before. That's for damn sure.
Finishing up these rankings, I was struggling with this last one. There was a bunch of guys I was just like, who fits in last year? And I just kind of settled in on the big guy down in Indianapolis, Jelani Woods. My goodness, this guy looks more like I don't know. I don't want to say a basketball player either because he's so freaking, just physically built too, but a giant person out there. And that had some big moments, is a red zone threat, just kind of what's his actual upside. I don't know. He's just probably not. He's probably more just a lumber out there, just kind of mixing it in with the rest of these tight ends. But I mean, he does have some things you look at that get you excited. Do you have any thoughts on Jelani Woods?
I think that this is an excellent opportunity, and it's a kind of like a fantasy psychology test because we all have Colts tight end fatigue for what feels like a decade now. Between your Doyles and your Allie Coxes and just everybody, your Eric Ebrons, everybody who's come and gone, and you just haven't had a consistent presence at the position. He's got nice capital, 3rd round draft pick, very nice athletic, big jump ball profile. I don't know specifically where they're going to go with this offense because, they have high powered personnel and a high powered offensive coordinator, but it's not exactly, need for speed over there. So, this is a guy similar to Dulcich where be patient. I wouldn't cut him or trade him for, anything other than a good upside deal. Just, wait and see.
Well said. Well, that wraps up these top 24 Dynasty fantasy football rankings. My goodness, I'm going to need to obviously power down a little more caffeine here before I get actually started bartending tonight. Maybe slip in a little nap here.
Nice.
Chuck, my friend, thank you for joining me today. What do you got going on for the folks? Anything you want to shout out, tell the people you got going on going forward?
Oh God, what is happening? I'm doing 2 way too early redraft drafts on Wednesday, June 14th at noon. It's going to be way too much for me to handle. So if you want to see somebody melt down live on stream, come check me out on my YouTube channel. This Guy Sucks with Chuck Bass. Other than that, just, going nuts.
Yes, and that is if you're watching on Twitter right now, you can follow him at Chuck Bass FF, and you can find all that stuff. Thank you for joining me, everybody. You can find me every week, Player Profiler, Sports Gambling Podcast Network, and of course on the Face Off Sports Network, doing this Cocktail Hour Fantasy Football Podcast 2 to 3 times a week. And if you wouldn't mind, if you made it all the way through the show, if you wouldn't mind giving a like, subscribe, rating on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whichever one your favorite one is. Jamie, of course, we still love you, Jamie. I know you would have commented more if you could. No worries, my man. I appreciate you joining us again. Thanks a lot, everybody, and have a great rest of your Friday, okay?